The sound of my mother's hand hitting my face was louder than the string quartet playing behind us. 200 guests. Crystal glasses frozen midair. My sister's wedding dress glowing under the chandelier lights. And my mother's palm print, blazing red across my cheek, in front of every single person who mattered to her. My earring hit the marble floor before I even felt the sting. Blood trickled down my earlobe, warm and slow, dripping onto the collar of the $10,000 dress I'd bought myself. Not a gift. Not charity. Mine. She had asked me. No. She had announced, on a microphone in front of the entire ballroom, that I would be signing my penthouse over to my sister as a wedding gift. I said no. And that's when she hit me. Everyone waited for me to cry, to apologize, to do what I had done my entire life, shrink, fold, disappear so the peace could be kept. Instead, I bent down, picked up my earring off the floor, straightened my spine, and walked out of that ballroom without saying a single word. Then I made one phone call. And exactly 1 hour later, the woman my mother feared most in this world walked through those same doors, and by the time she left, my mother wasn't screaming at me anymore. She was screaming for mercy. But to understand how we got there, you need to go back. Not 3 weeks, not 3 months. You need to go back almost 30 years, to the day my parents decided which daughter mattered, and which one was just there to make the numbers work. My name is Maya. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I was the daughter nobody clapped for. My younger sister, Bianca, was born 18 months after me, and from the moment she arrived, something in my parents shifted. I didn't understand it as a child. I just knew that her report cards went on the refrigerator and mine went in a drawer. I knew her recitals got the good seats, front row, camera ready, and mine got my father checking his watch from the back. I told myself it didn't matter. Kids tell themselves a lot of things to survive. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until I was 28 years old, was that the favoritism wasn't just emotional. It was financial. My grandmother, my father's mother, was the only person in that family who ever looked at me like I was worth something. Her name was Eleanor. Yes, same as my mother, which always felt like some kind of cosmic joke because they could not have been more different women. Grandma Eleanor built a manufacturing business from nothing in the 1970s, back when women weren't even allowed to open a bank account without a husband's signature. She sold that business for $11 million when I was 19 years old. And she never let anyone forget that every cent of it was hers, and hers to give. I used to spend summers at her lake house, just the two of us, and she would tell me stories about the men who underestimated her, business partners, bankers, even her own husband, my grandfather, who left her for another woman when my father was 12. They all thought I'd fold, she told me once, stirring sugar into her tea with a spoon that probably cost more than my college textbooks. Every single one of them thought I'd fold. And every single one of them is either broke or dead now, Maya. Remember that. I didn't know how much I would need to remember it, because while I was building my career, first in finance, then in real estate development, working 80-hour weeks in a city where nobody knew my last name, my parents were building something else entirely. A story. The story they told everyone was that I was cold, distant, selfish, that I'd abandoned the family for my career, that I barely called, that I'd become too good for Sunday dinners. The truth was simpler and uglier. Every time I came home, I got compared to Bianca. Every time I achieved something, my mother found a way to make it small. When I got my first promotion at 24, she asked if it was because I was sleeping with my boss. When I closed my first 8-figure deal at 26, my father asked when I was going to settle down and give them grandchildren, like Bianca was already planning to. So I stopped going as often. And that absence became the story they told. Not, she stayed away because we hurt her. Just, she stayed away because she thinks she's better than us. Meanwhile, Bianca could do no wrong. She dropped out of college twice. She'd been through 4 jobs in 6 years, each one ending with some dramatic story about how her boss was toxic or her coworkers were jealous. She lived in an apartment my parents paid for. She drove a car my parents paid for. And when she started dating a man named Chase, a hedge fund guy with a trust fund and a jaw made for magazine covers, my parents lit up like she cured cancer. The wedding planning started almost a year before I bought my penthouse. I want to be clear about something, because this detail matters more than you know right now. I did not inherit that penthouse. I did not receive it as a gift. I earned every single dollar of that $2.1 million purchase through 11 years of work that my own family barely acknowledged. I signed the papers alone, in an empty conference room, on a Tuesday afternoon, and nobody in my family even knew until I posted a single photo of the skyline view 3 weeks later. My mother's response to that photo was a text message that read, "Must be nice." 2 words. That was it. 11 years of my life, reduced to 2 words, dripping in resentment. I should have known then that this wasn't over. I should have known that a woman like my mother doesn't see her daughter's success as something to celebrate. She sees it as a resource. The first hint came 4 months before the wedding, when my mother called me, not to ask how I was doing, but to ask, almost casually, whether my building did event rentals. I told her I didn't know, and I didn't think about it again. I should have thought about it again, because 2 months later, at a family dinner I almost skipped, my father brought up something that made the back of my neck go cold. "Bianca and Chase were talking," he said, cutting into his steak without looking at me, "about maybe doing engagement photos at your building. The view is incredible. It would really elevate the whole aesthetic." I said that was fine. Photos I could handle. Photos were nothing. I had no idea that photos was the opening move in something much bigger. Something that had been discussed, planned, and agreed upon by everyone in that family, everyone except me, for months. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late spring, at a venue so expensive that just hearing the deposit amount made my stomach turn. 240 guests. A ballroom with hand-painted ceilings. A band flown in from New York. I asked my mother once, carefully, how they were affording all of it. Chase's family had money, sure, but my parents were putting in a substantial amount too, more than I'd ever seen them spend on anything, including their own 30th anniversary, which they'd celebrated at a chain steakhouse. My mother's answer was vague. "We've been saving," she said, "and Grandma Eleanor helped." That last part didn't sit right with me. Grandma Eleanor was generous, but she was not a woman who wrote blank checks, especially not to my parents, who she'd had a complicated, often frosty relationship with for as long as I could remember. I filed that detail away in the back of my mind. I didn't know yet that it was the first thread of a much bigger lie. The lie that, when it finally unraveled, would bring my mother to her knees in front of everyone she'd spent her entire life trying to impress. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother called and asked to meet me for coffee. Just the 2 of us. She said it in a tone I hadn't heard from her in years, soft, almost warm, the kind of voice she used to use before I understood what that warmth usually cost. I should have known it was a setup. I should have recognized the pattern. But some small, stupid part of me, the part that was still 8 years old, still hoping to be chosen, said yes. We met at a cafe near my building. She hugged me too long. She complimented my blazer. She asked about my work with an interest she'd never shown before. And then, halfway through her second latte, she said the sentence that changed everything. "Maya, honey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep an open mind." I put my cup down slowly. "Okay." Bianca and Chase's wedding planner mentioned that some of the biggest weddings this year are doing after-parties in private residences. It's this whole new trend. Intimate, exclusive, very high-end. And your penthouse has that view, that terrace. I felt my stomach tighten. "You want to use my place for the after-party." "We want to use it as a gift," she said, and smiled like she just handed me the greatest opportunity of my life. "From you. To your sister. On her wedding day." I laughed, actually laughed, because I thought she was joking. She was not joking. "Mom, I'm not hosting an after-party for 200 people in my home." "Not hosting," she said, her smile tightening at the edges. "Gifting. As in the deed. As in you sign it over to Bianca and Chase as a wedding present." I sat there in silence for what felt like an entire minute, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "You want me to give my sister my penthouse," I said slowly, "as a wedding gift. It would mean so much to her, Maya. You know she's always struggled to find her footing. This would give her and Chase a real start, a real foundation. I bought that penthouse with 11 years of my own money," I said. "I'm not giving it away." My mother's face changed then, just for a second, just a flicker, into something I recognized from childhood. Something cold and calculating, quickly smoothed back into warmth. "We'll talk about it later," she said. Think about your sister. Think about family. I should have known, right then, that later meant in front of 200 witnesses when you can't say no without looking like a monster. I had no idea how far they were willing to go. I had no idea about the paperwork already sitting in a lawyer's office. I had no idea about the conversations happening behind closed doors, the plans being made, the pressure being built like a dam about to break. All I knew was that something had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the wedding wasn't going to be about Bianca at all. It was going to be about me. And I was right, but not in the way I expected. The week before the wedding, things got strange. My father, who hadn't called me directly in over a year, suddenly texted twice. Once to ask about my schedule for the wedding weekend, and once, cryptically, to say, "Your grandmother wants to see you before Saturday. Says it's important." I hadn't spoken to Grandma Eleanor in almost a month, which was unusual for us. She called me every Sunday, like clockwork, ever since I moved out for college. When 2 Sundays passed without her call, I'd assumed she was traveling. She did that sometimes, disappearing to some spa in Arizona or a friend's villa in Portugal without telling anyone. But something about my father's text made my skin prickle. My grandmother didn't relay messages through my father. They barely spoke unless it was mandatory. I drove out to her house 2 days before the wedding. She opened the door herself. She always did. Refused to have staff greet guests. Said it was common courtesy, something your grandfather never understood. And the moment I saw her face, I knew something was wrong. She looked tired. Not sick, not frail. Just tired in a way I'd never seen on her before. Like she was carrying something heavy and had been carrying it for a long time. "Sit," she said, and led me to the sunroom where we always talked. She didn't offer tea this time. She just sat across from me, folded her hands, and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm while I tell it to you." My heart started pounding. "Grandma, you're scaring me." "Good," she said. "You should be scared. Not of me. Of them." And then she told me that 8 months earlier, she discovered something wrong with her trust accounts. The ones she'd set up years ago, one for me, one for Bianca, meant to be released to each of us on our 35th birthdays. Standard estate planning, done through her longtime lawyer, funded with several $1,000,000 each. Except when she requested a routine statement update, her new financial advisor, the old one had retired the year before, flagged something strange. My trust had been drained. Not touched, not adjusted, drained. Nearly $900,000, withdrawn in a series of transfers over almost 4 years, funneled through an account that traced back, after months of quiet forensic accounting that my grandmother had paid for out of her own pocket, telling no one, to my parents. I sat there frozen, unable to process the words coming out of her mouth. $900,000, I repeated, from my trust. Started small, she said. A withdrawal here, a loan there, always with some story, medical bills, home repairs, help for your cousin. Small enough that my old advisor never flagged it as unusual. But it added up, Maya. It added up to nearly everything. I felt the room tilt slightly. Where did it go? My grandmother's jaw tightened. Some of it went to your father's failed investments. Some of it went to credit card debt they never told anyone about. And a significant portion, nearly $300,000 of it, went directly into funding your sister's wedding. I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, waiting for this to somehow not be real. They stole from you, she said, to pay for the wedding where they're going to ask you to give away even more. I felt sick, physically sick, like the floor had opened up beneath me. Why didn't you tell me the moment you found out? I whispered. Because I needed proof, she said. I needed something airtight, something they couldn't spin, couldn't lie their way out of. I spent 8 months building a case, Maya. Bank records, wire transfers, forged signatures on 2 of the disbursement authorizations, signatures that are supposed to be yours, that you never gave. They forged my signature. Twice, she said. Once when you were 25, once when you were 27. I have the documents. I have a handwriting expert's report. I have everything. I sat in that sunroom for almost an hour, absorbing what felt like an earthquake, rearranging the foundation of my entire life. Every slight, every cold comment, every must be nice text message, it all reorganized itself into something darker. They hadn't just favored Bianca emotionally. They had been stealing from me to fund it. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked. 2 days before the wedding. My grandmother's expression didn't soften, but something in her voice did. Because I think they're going to try something at that wedding. Your father mentioned the penthouse to me last month, asked if I thought it would be a meaningful gesture for you to gift it to your sister. I told him absolutely not, that it was inappropriate, and I wanted no part of that conversation. They're going to ask me publicly, I said, understanding hitting me all at once. They're going to ask in front of everyone, so I can't say no. That's my fear, my grandmother said. And Maya, I need you to let them try. I stared at her. What? Let them try, she repeated, and for the first time that afternoon, something like fire came back into her eyes. Don't confront them before the wedding. Don't warn them. Let them show everyone exactly who they are, in front of everyone they've spent their whole lives trying to impress. And when they do, you call me. I don't care what time it is. I don't care what's happening. You call me, and I will be there within the hour, and I will end this. I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet, but I agreed. I had no idea, sitting in that sunroom, just how bad it was going to get before it got better. I had no idea my mother would actually raise her hand to me in front of 200 people. I had no idea that when I picked up that phone and made the call, I would be setting off the final collapse of every lie my family had built their lives on. The morning of the wedding, I almost didn't go. I stood in my closet for 20 minutes, staring at the dress I'd bought, feeling like I was gearing up for battle instead of a celebration. My grandmother's words kept looping in my head. Let them try. I texted her once before I left. I'm scared. She texted back within a minute. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. I'll be ready. Just call me the second it happens. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I imagined a quiet conversation in a hallway, maybe an awkward moment during the toasts. I never imagined a microphone. The venue was breathtaking, I'll give them that. Gold accents, ivory drapery, a dome ceiling painted with clouds that must have cost more than most people's houses. Bianca looked stunning, radiant in a way that almost made me forget everything my grandmother had told me 2 days earlier. Almost. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Vows exchanged. Tears shed, the whole traditional performance. I clapped along with everyone else, even as a small, cold part of me kept replaying the words, $900,000, and forged signatures on a loop. The reception started smoothly, too. Dinner was served. Toast began. My father gave a speech about Bianca being the light of our lives since the day she was born, a phrase that, knowing what I now knew, felt like a knife twisting slowly into my ribs. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped during the toasts, right after the best man finished his speech, right as the MC. A friend of Chase's family, someone hired specifically to run the reception, was about to transition into the father-daughter dance. My mother stood up. She walked to the small stage where the band was set up, and she reached for the microphone stand like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt every muscle in my body go rigid. I just want to say a few words, she said. Her voice amplified across the ballroom, sweet and bright and performative in a way I recognized instantly. Before we move into the next part of the evening, I want to talk about the meaning of family. 200 guests turned their attention to her. Champagne glasses paused midair. My father stood slightly behind her, beaming, nodding along like he already knew every word she was about to say. Because he did. Because this had been planned. Bianca and Chase are starting a new chapter, my mother continued, and in this family, we believe in supporting each other, in lifting each other up. And today, I'm so proud to say that Bianca's older sister, Maya, has something very special she wants to give the happy couple. My blood turned to ice. She turned, found me at my table, and extended her hand toward me with a smile so bright it looked almost unhinged. Maya, honey, why don't you come up and share the news? Every eye in that ballroom swung toward me. I sat there, frozen, feeling 200 sets of eyes crawling over my skin, waiting. My aunt in the third row was already reaching for her phone to record. Bianca, radiant in white, was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or entitlement, or both. I stood up slowly. I had no choice. Every second I stayed seated made the silence heavier, more suffocating. I walked to that stage like I was walking to my own execution. My mother handed me the microphone before I could refuse it, Her hand gripped my wrist for just a second, hard enough to hurt, hard enough to say without words, "Don't you dare embarrass me." "Everyone," my mother said, taking the microphone back before I could speak, her voice syrupy sweet. "Maya has generously decided to gift her penthouse to Bianca and Chase as a wedding present, so they can start their marriage with a beautiful home in the city." Gasps. Applause. Someone near the back actually cheered. Bianca stood up, tears already forming, moving toward me like she was about to embrace me in front of everyone. And I stood there on that stage, microphone now back in my mother's hand, 200 faces staring at me with expectation, and I understood with absolute clarity that if I didn't say something in the next 5 seconds, this lie would become permanent. It would become the story. Maya, generous to a fault, gave her sister a $2 million penthouse on her wedding day. I took the microphone from my mother's hand. The room went quiet. "I never agreed to that," I said, my voice shaking but clear enough to carry across the ballroom. "I never said I would give anyone my home." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever experienced in my life. My mother's smile didn't waver, not at first. She laughed, an actual laugh, bright and brittle, and reached for the microphone again. "Maya's just nervous. Everyone. She's always been a little shy about public speaking." "I'm not nervous," I said, pulling the microphone back. "I'm not giving away a home I spent 11 years building my career to afford. Not like this. Not on a stage, in front of people who didn't even know this was happening until 60 seconds ago." Someone in the crowd murmured. I saw Chase's mother lean over to whisper something to the woman beside her, her expression sharpening into something judgmental. My mother's mask cracked completely. "You ungrateful little," she started, then caught herself, glancing at the crowd, forcing her voice back into a strained, pleading register. "Maya, please, don't do this. Not today. Not at your sister's wedding." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "You're the one who put this on a stage." My father stepped forward then, his face red, his voice low and furious, even as he tried to keep it under the volume of the microphone. "Get off the stage, Maya. You're humiliating this family." "I'm humiliating this family," I said, and something in me, something that had been quiet and small and obedient for 31 years, finally snapped loose. "You've been stealing from me for years, and I'm the one humiliating this family." The words left my mouth before I fully decided to say them, and the second they landed, the entire ballroom seemed to inhale at once. My mother's face went white, then red, then something worse, something feral. "How dare you!" she hissed, stepping toward me so fast I barely had time to react. "How dare you make up lies about us on your sister's wedding day?" "They're not lies," I said. $900,000, Mom. From my trust. Forged signatures. Grandma has all of it documented. I don't know if it was the mention of my grandmother, or the sheer public collapse of years of careful lies, or just decades of pent-up rage finally finding a target. But my mother's hand came up so fast I didn't even see it coming. The slap cracked across my face like a gunshot. My head snapped sideways. My earring, a small diamond stud I'd bought myself after closing my first major deal, flew off my ear and skittered somewhere across the marble stage floor. I felt the sharp, hot sting spread across my cheek, and a second later, warmth trickling down my earlobe where the earring had torn free. The entire ballroom gasped in unison. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 200 people watched my mother stand there, chest heaving, her hand still raised, as blood dripped slowly from my ear onto the white collar of my dress. I could have cried. Every instinct in my body, 31 years of conditioning, told me to cry, to apologize, to smooth this over the way I always had, to make myself small enough that the discomfort in the room would disappear. Instead, I bent down. I picked up my earring off the floor. I straightened my spine, and I looked my mother directly in the eyes. "You just did that in front of 200 witnesses," I said, quiet enough that only the microphone caught it, carrying my voice to every corner of that silent ballroom. "I hope it was worth it." Then I turned, walked off that stage, past my stunned sister, past my father who wouldn't meet my eyes, past 200 guests who didn't know whether to look at me or look away, and I walked straight out the ballroom doors into the marble lobby beyond. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone, but I found the contact. I pressed call. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting with her phone in her hand the entire evening. "It happened," I said, my voice breaking for the first time all night. "She hit me. In front of everyone. About the penthouse." There was a pause on the line, not long, just enough for me to hear my grandmother take one slow, sharp breath. "Are you hurt?" she asked, and her voice had dropped into something I'd never heard from her before. Something quiet and absolutely lethal. "My ear is bleeding," I said. "But I'm okay." "Where are you?" "In the lobby. I left the ballroom." "Stay there," she said. "Don't go back in. Don't talk to anyone. I am on my way. And Maya, I want you to know something." "What?" "This is the moment I've been waiting 8 months for," she said. "Everything is ready. Everything is documented. And in exactly 1 hour, your mother is going to understand what it means to underestimate the wrong woman." She hung up before I could respond. I stood alone in that marble lobby, blood drying on my earlobe, my hands still trembling, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something other than fear. I felt anticipation. Because I had no idea, standing there in that empty lobby, exactly what my grandmother had planned. I had no idea about the folder sitting in the back seat of her car. I had no idea about the phone call she'd already made to a lawyer, to a notary, to someone else entirely, someone whose identity would blow the lid off a secret my family had buried even deeper than the stolen money. All I knew was that in 1 hour, everything was going to change, and I had never wanted anything more in my entire life. The hour that followed was the longest of my life. I sat in a small sitting room just off the main lobby, a space meant for brides to touch up their makeup, and I stared at my reflection in a gilded mirror. My earlobe had stopped bleeding, but the mark on my cheek was still visible, a faint red shadow where my mother's hand had connected. I dabbed at it with a tissue, watching my own eyes in the mirror, trying to process everything. A wedding coordinator knocked once, asked if I needed anything, her face carefully neutral in that practiced way of someone trained not to react to family drama. I said I was fine. She didn't believe me, but she left. 20 minutes in, my phone buzzed. A text from Bianca. "What is wrong with you? You ruined my wedding. I hope you're happy." I stared at those words for a long time. "I hope you're happy," as if I'd been the one to stand on a stage and publicly humiliate someone. As if I'd been the one to raise my hand. I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another text, this time from my father. "Come back inside. Apologize to your mother. We can fix this. We can fix this." Like I was the broken thing. Like 31 years of being second place, being stolen from, being slapped on a stage in front of 200 people, was somehow a problem I needed to fix by apologizing. I didn't respond to that one either. At the 40-minute mark, curiosity got the better of me, and I cracked the door to the sitting room just enough to hear what was happening in the ballroom. The band had started playing again, something upbeat, desperate, clearly an attempt by someone, probably the wedding planner, to paper over the disaster and get the evening back on track. But I could hear the whispers underneath the music. I could hear the murmurs of 200 guests who had just watched a woman get slapped by her own mother on a stage, blood on her ear, in front of everyone. That kind of moment doesn't just get danced away. I closed the door again and went back to waiting. At the 55-minute mark, my phone rang. Not a text. A call. From my grandmother. "I'm 3 minutes away," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. Nothing like the warm grandmother who used to stir sugar into her tea and tell me stories about the lake house. This was a different woman, entirely. This was the woman who built an empire out of nothing and buried every man who underestimated her. "I need you to do exactly what I say." "Okay, go back into that ballroom. Sit at your table. Say nothing to anyone. When I walk in, I want your mother and father to see your face before they see mine. I want them to think, for just a moment, that you came back to apologize." A chill ran down my spine. "And then what?" "And then," my grandmother said, and I could hear something in her voice that sounded almost like satisfaction, "they're going to learn exactly what happens to people who steal from my granddaughter and then have the audacity to hit her for refusing to hand over even more." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then I fixed my hair, wiped away the last traces of tears, and walked back toward the ballroom doors. The moment I stepped inside, the room's energy shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes tracking me as I crossed the room toward my table, my chin held high despite every instinct screaming at me to disappear. My mother spotted me first. Relief flooded her face, visible, unguarded relief, the kind that told me she genuinely believed I'd come back to smooth things over, to apologize, to play the role I'd always played. She started to rise from her seat, probably to intercept me, to whisper some version of damage control in my ear before I could say anything else to embarrass her. She never got the chance, because at that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened again, and Grandma Eleanor walked in. I want you to understand something about my grandmother's presence, because it's hard to explain if you never met her. She was 78 years old, barely 5'4", silver hair always pinned into a sharp, elegant twist. She did not walk into rooms. She occupied them. She wore a deep emerald dress that night, simple but clearly expensive, and she carried a leather folder under one arm like it was a weapon. Behind her walked two people I didn't recognize immediately, a tall man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase, and a woman I would later learn was a licensed notary, there specifically to authenticate what was about to happen. The band's music faltered and died as the musicians noticed the shift in the room. Conversation stopped entirely. Every single guest turned to watch the elegant, silver-haired woman stride across the marble floor like she owned the building. My mother's face went through 3 distinct emotions in the span of about 2 seconds. First, confusion. Then, recognition. Then, something that looked a lot like dawning terror. "Eleanor," my mother said, forcing a smile onto her face as my grandmother approached. "What a surprise. We didn't know you were coming." "I wasn't invited," my grandmother said, her voice cutting cleanly across the silent ballroom, amplified by nothing but the sheer force of her presence. Which is fitting, considering what I'm about to tell everyone in this room was also never meant to see daylight. My father stood up slowly, his face pale. "Mom, this isn't the time." "On the contrary," my grandmother said, "this is exactly the time. You made sure of that yourselves about an hour ago when you decided to publicly demand my granddaughter's home and then struck her across the face when she refused." A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the crowd. I saw phones quietly lifting again, guests unable to resist documenting whatever was about to happen. My mother's composure cracked. "That's a family matter, Eleanor, it doesn't concern." "It concerns everyone in this room," my grandmother interrupted, her voice rising just enough to carry to every corner of the ballroom, "because I am about to tell 200 witnesses exactly how you funded this wedding." The color drained completely from my mother's face. "I don't know what you think you know," my father said, his voice tight. "But whatever it is, it's not true. It's documented," my grandmother said, and opened the leather folder in her hands. Bank statements, wire transfers, forged authorization signatures. Maya's signature, forged twice, once when she was 25 and once when she was 27, on documents releasing funds from a trust that was never yours to touch. She turned, slowly, addressing the entire room now, her voice steady and clear and merciless. "For 4 years, my son and his wife have been siphoning money from a trust fund set up for their older daughter, Maya. Nearly $900,000, drained through fraudulent authorizations, some of which funded, and I have the receipts to prove this, a significant portion of tonight's wedding." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "That's a lie," my mother said, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence, thin and brittle now, cracking at the edges. "That is a complete fabrication." "Is it?" my grandmother said, and nodded to the man in the gray suit beside her, who stepped forward and opened his briefcase. "Because I have a forensic handwriting analysis that says otherwise. I have 4 years of bank statements. I have wire transfer records showing money moving from a trust account directly into your personal accounts, and from there, into deposits made to this venue, to the florist, to the band standing right there." She gestured toward the stunned musicians, who suddenly looked like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Bianca, still in her wedding dress, stood up from her seat near the front, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "Mom, Dad, what is she talking about?" Neither of my parents answered her. "You want to know the truly remarkable part?" my grandmother continued, her voice now carrying a note of cold, controlled fury that I had never heard from her before, not once in 31 years. An hour ago, in this very room, you demanded that Maya sign over a $2.1 million property she earned entirely on her own as a gift for the wedding you funded in part with money you stole from her. And when she refused to be robbed a second time, you struck her across the face. Every eye in the room swung toward me. I stood there at my table, the mark on my cheek still faintly visible, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel exposed by that attention. I felt vindicated. "This is insane," my father said, his voice rising, panic bleeding through every syllable. "You can't just walk in here and destroy our daughter's wedding with accusations." "I'm not destroying anything," my grandmother said, utterly unmoved. "You destroyed this the moment you decided your older daughter's success was a resource to exploit instead of an achievement to celebrate. I am simply making sure that everyone in this room understands exactly who you are, since you spent the last 30 years so carefully curating who they thought you were." She turned to the notary, standing quietly beside her. "Please provide copies of the documentation to anyone who requests them. I want no ambiguity about what's being said here tonight." Then she turned back to my parents, and her voice dropped, becoming quieter but somehow even more devastating. "I have already contacted my attorney. Restitution proceedings will begin Monday morning. I will be pursuing the full $900,000, plus interest, plus damages for the fraud committed against my granddaughter's trust. And effective tonight, both of you are permanently removed as beneficiaries of my estate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back audibly whispered, "Oh my God, you can't do that," my mother said, but the words came out as barely more than a whisper, all the fight drained out of her voice. "I built every cent of that estate myself," my grandmother said. "I can absolutely do that. And I already have." She reached into her folder one final time and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up just long enough for the nearest guest to see the letterhead of a law firm. "This was signed and notarized this afternoon," she said. "Before I ever walked through those doors tonight. I didn't come here hoping you'd prove me wrong. I came here already knowing exactly who you were." My mother sank back into her chair, her face a portrait of total collapse, the polished, controlled woman who had spent decades performing perfection for an audience, finally undone in front of the very audience she built her whole life around impressing. Bianca turned to look at me then, tears streaming down her face, mixing with her wedding makeup, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Did you know about this?" she asked me, her voice breaking. "Did you know they were stealing from you?" "I found out 2 days ago," I said quietly. "I didn't want to ruin your wedding, Bianca, but they made sure it got ruined anyway." She turned back to our parents, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder, colder. "You used my wedding to launder stolen money. You used it to try to steal from Maya again, in front of everyone." Neither of them answered her. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. My grandmother closed her folder, looked around the silent ballroom one final time, and then turned to me. "Maya," she said, her voice softening for the first time all evening, "would you like to leave with me, or would you like to stay?" I looked around that ballroom, at the 200 guests who had watched my entire family unravel in real time, at my mother crumpled in her chair, at my father staring at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes, at my sister standing in her wedding dress with mascara streaked down her cheeks, at the life I thought I knew, dismantled piece by piece in the space of 1 hour. "I'd like to leave," I said, and so we did. Together, my grandmother's hand steady on my arm, we walked out of that ballroom, past 200 silent witnesses, into the cool night air outside, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was walking towards something instead of away from it. The weeks that followed were chaos, but a different kind of chaos than I was used to. Not the quiet, corrosive chaos of a family pretending everything was fine while poison ran through every interaction. This was loud, messy, undeniable chaos, the kind that finally forces truth into the open air. My grandmother's lawyer moved fast. Within a week, formal restitution proceedings had begun against my parents. The forensic accounting my grandmother had commissioned turned out to be even more damning than what she'd revealed at the wedding. It wasn't just my trust that had been touched. There were irregularities in my grandmother's own accounts too, smaller amounts, harder to trace, money that had been borrowed over the years and never repaid. My parents hired a lawyer of their own, of course. They tried to argue that the funds were family money, that the trust had always been informally understood as accessible for family needs, that Maya would have said yes if we'd asked. But forged signatures don't leave much room for that kind of argument. 2 separate handwriting experts confirmed what my grandmother's original analysis had found. The case never even made it to trial. My parents settled, agreeing to repay the full amount over a structured 5-year period, using, among other things, the proceeds from selling the house I grew up in, the one that suddenly felt too large, too expensive, too full of memories neither of them wanted to sit with anymore. Bianca's marriage survived the wedding disaster, technically, but something had cracked open in her that night that never fully closed. She called me 3 weeks later, her voice small and uncertain in a way I'd never heard from her before. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear to you, Maya, I didn't know where the money was coming from. I just knew Mom and Dad said they'd handle it." I believed her. Bianca had been coddled, protected, kept comfortably ignorant her entire life. Not necessarily by choice, but by a family system designed to keep her that way, the golden child who never had to ask hard questions because someone else was always handling the details. "I'm not asking you to fix this," I told her. "I'm just telling you what happened. Can we start over?" she asked. "Not with them. Just us. Sisters." I didn't have an answer for her that day. I'm still not sure I have a complete one now. But we talk more than we used to. Slowly, carefully, without our parents in the middle translating our relationship into something it never actually was. My mother has called me exactly 4 times since the wedding. I haven't answered any of them. My father sent one letter, an actual, physical letter, handwritten, full of justifications dressed up as apologies. Things like, "We always meant to pay it back, and we never thought it would come to this, and we hope you can find it in your heart to understand the pressure we were under. I am simply making sure that everyone in this room understands exactly who you are, since you spent the last 30 years so carefully curating who they thought you were." She turned to the notary, standing quietly beside her. "Please provide copies of the documentation to anyone who requests them. I want no ambiguity about what's being said here tonight." Then she turned back to my parents, and her voice dropped, becoming quieter but somehow even more devastating. "I have already contacted my attorney. Restitution proceedings will begin Monday morning. I will be pursuing the full $900,000, plus interest, plus damages for the fraud committed against my granddaughter's trust. And effective tonight, both of you are permanently removed as beneficiaries of my estate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back audibly whispered, "Oh my God, you can't do that," my mother said, but the words came out as barely more than a whisper, all the fight drained out of her voice. "I built every cent of that estate myself," my grandmother said. "I can absolutely do that. And I already have." She reached into her folder one final time and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up just long enough for the nearest guest to see the letterhead of a law firm. "This was signed and notarized this afternoon," she said. "Before I ever walked through those doors tonight. I didn't come here hoping you'd prove me wrong. I came here already knowing exactly who you were." My mother sank back into her chair, her face a portrait of total collapse, the polished, controlled woman who had spent decades performing perfection for an audience, finally undone in front of the very audience she built her whole life around impressing. Bianca turned to look at me then, tears streaming down her face, mixing with her wedding makeup, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Did you know about this?" she asked me, her voice breaking. "Did you know they were stealing from you?" "I found out 2 days ago," I said quietly. "I didn't want to ruin your wedding, Bianca, but they made sure it got ruined anyway." She turned back to our parents, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder, colder. "You used my wedding to launder stolen money. You used it to try to steal from Meyer again, in front of everyone." Neither of them answered her. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. My grandmother closed her folder, looked around the silent ballroom one final time, and then turned to me. "Maya," she said, her voice softening for the first time all evening, "would you like to leave with me, or would you like to stay?" I looked around that ballroom, at the 200 guests who had watched my entire family unravel in real time, at my mother crumpled in her chair, at my father staring at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes, at my sister standing in her wedding dress with mascara streaked down her cheeks, at the life I thought I knew, dismantled piece by piece in the space of 1 hour. "I'd like to leave," I said. And so we did. Together, my grandmother's hand steady on my arm, we walked out of that ballroom, past 200 silent witnesses, into the cool night air outside. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was walking towards something instead of away from it. The weeks that followed were chaos, but a different kind of chaos than I was used to. Not the quiet, corrosive chaos of a family pretending everything was fine while poison ran through every interaction. This was loud, messy, undeniable chaos, the kind that finally forces truth into the open air. My grandmother's lawyer moved fast. Within a week, formal restitution proceedings had begun against my parents. The forensic accounting my grandmother had commissioned turned out to be even more damning than what she'd revealed at the wedding. It wasn't just my trust that had been touched. There were irregularities in my grandmother's own accounts too, smaller amounts, harder to trace, money that had been borrowed over the years and never repaid. My parents hired a lawyer of their own, of course. They tried to argue that the funds were family money, that the trust had always been informally understood as accessible for family needs, that Maya would have said yes if we'd asked. But forged signatures don't leave much room for that kind of argument. 2 separate handwriting experts confirmed what my grandmother's original analysis had found. The case never even made it to trial. My parents settled, agreeing to repay the full amount over a structured 5-year period, using, among other things, the proceeds from selling the house I grew up in, the one that suddenly felt too large, too expensive, too full of memories neither of them wanted to sit with anymore. Bianca's marriage survived the wedding disaster, technically, but something had cracked open in her that night that never fully closed. She called me 3 weeks later, her voice small and uncertain in a way I'd never heard from her before. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear to you, Maya, I didn't know where the money was coming from. I just knew Mom and Dad said they'd handle it. I believed her. Bianca had been coddled, protected, kept comfortably ignorant her entire life. Not necessarily by choice, but by a family system designed to keep her that way, the golden child who never had to ask hard questions because someone else was always handling the details. I'm not asking you to fix this," I told her. "I'm just telling you what happened. Can we start over?" she asked. "Not with them. Just us. Sisters." I didn't have an answer for her that day. I'm still not sure I have a complete one now. But we talk more than we used to. Slowly, carefully, without our parents in the middle translating our relationship into something it never actually was. My mother has called me exactly 4 times since the wedding. I haven't answered any of them. My father sent one letter, an actual, physical letter, handwritten, full of justifications dressed up as apologies. Things like, "We always meant to pay it back, and we never thought it would come to this, and we hope you can find it in your heart to understand the pressure we were under." I read it once. I didn't respond. My grandmother, meanwhile, transferred what remained of my original trust into an account fully under my control, along with a formal letter outlining exactly what had been taken and exactly what had been restored. She also, in a move that surprised absolutely no one who knew her, rewrote her entire will. I found out 3 months later, over tea at the lake house, that I was now the sole beneficiary of her estate. Not Bianca, not my parents, just me. "I'm not doing this because I don't love the rest of them," she told me, stirring sugar into her cup with that same silver spoon she'd used my entire childhood. "I'm doing this because you're the only one in this family who never once asked me for anything." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, most days. I still live in my penthouse. Nobody's name is on that deed but mine, and it never will be, not unless I decide otherwise on my own terms in my own time. Sometimes, late at night, I stand on that terrace my mother wanted to hand over to my sister as a wedding present, and I look out over the city skyline, and I think about that moment on the stage, the microphone in my hand, 200 faces staring at me, my mother's palm cracking against my cheek, the earrings skittering across the marble floor. I think about how close I came to folding, how close I came to doing what I'd always done, shrinking myself down until I fit into the small, convenient shape my family had built for me. And I think about my grandmother's voice on the phone that night, steady and certain. "In exactly 1 hour, your mother is going to understand what it means to underestimate the wrong woman." She was right. My mother spent her entire life building a version of herself for other people to admire. A perfect family, a perfect image, a perfect story where she was always the woman in control. It took 1 hour, one ballroom, and one silver-haired woman who refused to be underestimated to bring that entire story crashing down. I used to think revenge was loud, dramatic, something you scream across a room in the heat of the moment. I learned that real revenge is quiet. It's a leather folder full of bank statements. It's a lawyer's letterhead signed and notarized hours before anyone knew it was coming. It's a woman who spent 8 months building an airtight case instead of one angry phone call. Real revenge doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs to be right. If you've ever been the child who was never quite good enough, the one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition, the one who was expected to give and give and give until there was nothing left, I hope this story reminded you of something important. You don't owe anyone your success. Not your parents, not your siblings, not anyone who only started paying attention to you the moment you had something they wanted. And sometimes, the people who love you the most aren't the ones who raised you. Sometimes, they're the ones who show up exactly when you need them, 1 hour later, folder in hand, ready to make sure the truth finally sees the light. If this story hit home for you, let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, real stories of family betrayal, quiet revenge, and the moments people finally stop folding, make sure you're subscribed, because there are so many more still to come.